What is up, everyone? Today I'm going to be refinishing this Drexel 9-drawer dresser. It's from the, 60s or 70s probably. It's got an orangey tone, but overall it's in great shape and I love the clean lines. So let's see how we can modernize this. I'm really excited to get started on this one. It's my very first campaign style long dresser and I just love this style. So first step, let's tackle the body. First, I'm going to get rid of all the drawers and the doors. This thing was filled with a lot of dust, so I'm also going to give it a nice vacuum before I get started. I like to lay the dresser on its back for this step just because it allows me to get access to all sides, especially these dressers that have sort of the dustboard in between the drawers. Just make sure I'm getting underneath them, on top of them, and in all the corners and the back. To clean the dresser off from the grime and dust, I'm going to use a 50-50 mixture of denatured alcohol and water. This step isn't 100% necessary if you're going to be stripping the finish off instead of sanding it right away, but I just wanted to get it nice and clean. And then next, I'm going to use lacquer thinner over paper towels and try and just wipe off the finish after letting it soak on the wood for a couple minutes. Using the paper towels helps to keep the lacquer thinner sort of in place and also stops it from evaporating so quickly. If I was just to pour it directly on, it would go all over the place, drip off the sides, and so this really helps keep it controllable. So you can see it worked, but not 100%. So I'm just coming back with a little more lacquer thinner to try to get the rest of the finish off. Later, I'll use some steel wool and a brush to help with this process. And of course, as just a reminder, safety first. Working with chemicals, it's always advised to wear gloves and, if needed, a face mask, a respirator. I'm still trying to get better about that. I am working in a well-ventilated space, so the fumes weren't too bad, but it's always better to be safe. For some reason, this side was a little stubborn, so I'm going to get a brush here in a second to help with this. And I'll just continue after this to work my way around the entire body of the dresser to get all the finish off in preparation for sanding. As a final step before sanding, I am going to just scrape off any of this stubborn residual that wouldn't come off with the lacquer thinner, and this is going to just make sure I'm set up nicely to get a nice clean sand. For the vertical surfaces, I have decided to switch over to Clean Strip Premium Stripper. This is in a gel form and it'll just stay in place better on these vertical surfaces. This stuff is pretty simple to use. You just brush it on the surface And usually, honestly, by the time I am done brushing it on the whole surface, it's ready to scrape off. I think it does say to let it sit for like 15 minutes, but this is probably after 2 minutes or so, and it's coming off pretty well. Now that we've got the majority of the finish removed, I'm going to come in with my 5-inch orbital sander, starting with a 120 grit sandpaper and working up to 180 before I move on to finishing. And speaking of finishing, I am going to go dark with this dresser. I love that high contrast between the bright brass poles and the dark wood. So I am pretty excited to get through all of this prep work so I can move on to stain. The 120 grit that I was just doing has removed all of the remaining finish. Now moving up to 180 just to make sure it's all nice and smooth, and it's refining the scratch pattern. So in case there were any little swirls or anything, that should take care of it with this higher grit. And the sanding is never done, continuing that same process on the sides and the front trim parts of the dresser. While you watch me do this most exciting work, I wanted to just take a second to thank all of you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your comments. I really look forward to hearing from you and what you think of my projects every time I post a video. So please continue to do so. Let me know how you think this project is going, and I look forward to reading those. Thanks. Next, I need to address the front bottom trim piece. So I'm just gonna brush on some lacquer thinner and do the stripping process here, and then I'll come in with my sander. I've switched over to my Surf Prep sander just because it's a nice square shape and allows me to get right up next to the corners on this part of the dresser. There is a curved detail around the exterior on all 4 sides of the dresser front, so I'm just going to be using some sandpaper. I'm going to hand sand these areas, and I'm using the Bondo scraper to wrap my sandpaper around it, and that allows me to get right up into these little areas. Now that all the sanding is complete, I'm going to use my vacuum just to get all the sanding dust that might have fallen inside and around and on the outside before moving on to the next step. Now we finally get to move on to stain. So I'm using a water-based stain by Salmon. It's their chocolate color. And so I'm just gonna spray the surface here and wipe this down and So it's wet, but not too wet, and that just allows the stain to slide evenly across the surface and hopefully absorb nice and evenly. So this wood stain says it does not require any wood conditioner, so I'm not going to be using one. I'm applying it with a blue sponge, so I'm just putting a little bit on sponge and then working it into the surface from left to right. I want to do the whole surface at once and then wipe it back just so it's hopefully nice and even, and I'm just using long strokes here just to move it across, make sure everything is evenly covered, and then we will wipe it back. So the stain was a little thick. It did dry. It seemed like it was drying on the surface pretty quick. So I am having a little trouble wiping it off and getting an even coloring. And I really was not that happy with how this ended up here. So I decided to strip this back and try something different. This is veneer, so I'm trying to be careful not to burn through it. So I am just using 180 just to try and get this very top layer that the stain absorbed into off. Next, I'm going to seal this sanded surface with wax-free shellac. I'm hoping this will help to get a nice even coverage when I try again. The shellac dries, I am going to strip the drawers, so I'm using the Clean Strip Premium Stripper. Here it was just a bit easier and faster than the lacquer thinner process, so I'm applying the stripper to the drawer fronts, letting it sit for a few minutes, coming back, scraping off, and then I'll do a final cleanup with some steel wool and lacquer thinner. The shellac has dried for an hour, which is what the label says needs to happen before you can put anything over it. So now that that is done, we can try our stain out again. I'm going to apply it using the same process that I used last time, where I'll apply it to the surface with the blue sponge in long strokes across the entire surface, and then wiping it back pretty quickly afterwards. And again, it wasn't wiping off very nicely. So I am going to quickly spray it down with water and try and wipe it off. So I'm gonna think on what to do next and just kind of zen out and focus on these drawers. So moving on to the sanding process for these, just going through the grits of 120 and 180. So my next plan of attack is to do a tan wash and then a different stain and glaze combo. So first things first is mixing up my paint wash. So I'm using Fusion Mineral Paint Algonquin for tan wash, and I'm doing a ratio of 4 parts water to 1 part paint. This process is pretty straightforward and very similar to trying to apply the water-based stain. So I will use my blue sponge to apply the paint wash over the entire surface and then wipe it back. So at this point, I was feeling better, and later I will have wished I had stopped at this step, but I don't. So before moving on, I do want to seal this paint wash with some wax-free shellac. This will ensure that my next water-based layers don't reactivate the paint wash and change that at all. I kind of just wanted this under layer to cut any of the yellows and oranges in the wood before adding the additional layers that I am going to do. After an hour and before the glaze, I am just going to do a scuff sand with a very, very high grit superfine sandpaper. So bring some warmth and depth back to the wood. I am applying a glaze. It's a water-based glaze by General Finishes in the color Van Dyke Brown. So this is applied similarly to a stain or a paint wash, where you apply it and then it says to just wipe it back. So at this point, I did think it was looking nice, but I just had my heart set on a very dark wood for this piece. So I'm throwing something else at it. After letting that dry for a few hours, I decided to come back and apply a gel stain in the color Kona by Varathane. This is an oil-based stain. Should I have waited 24 hours? Probably, but I didn't. So we'll see how it goes. So it had been a very long day, and I have applied the gel stain to a few of the drawers, and it's still just not looking dark enough for me, so I'm probably going to do another coat or two on the everything. But for now, I'm going to let it sit overnight and just call it a day. So the next day I'm coming back, I'm going to apply a few more coats of gel stain on everything. So my plan here, I'm just doing a very light scuff sand and applying more layers of the gel stain with first a slip coat of mineral spirits. After a few coats of gel stain, it stopped really getting any darker, and so also it was kind of splotchy. And so I took a few days to think about it and let the stain dry. And what I decided on was falling back on my old failsafe, the toning process using dye stain in your top coat. So I have, as you saw there, used General Finish's dye stain in dark brown in a water-based top coat, and I'm just gonna keep applying layers of this lightly until I reach the desired color that I want. And you'll notice that the base is still at the paint wash stage. I kind of kept putting that off for some reason, but I end up going back off camera and staining it and applying all the same steps to match everything else. In between coats, I am doing a very light scuff sand with a high grit sandpaper just to help with adhesion. So after many layers of the top coat with the tinted dye, I'm getting happy. It is getting closer to the coloring that I'm looking for, maybe just a couple more coats to even things out. This is the original hardware that came with this dresser. Unfortunately, this pull was broken, and I could not find a replacement for it anywhere. I scoured the internet. But what I did find on eBay was these campaign poles that look very similar, and they're just a bit larger. So I did shine them up with some Barkeep's Friend, and I'm gonna drill holes to fit these larger hardware poles, and they'll cover up the old holes, and so it should be, you know, look like nothing was changed. So I measured the center of the drawer, and then I'm lining up the center of my hardware jig on the mark that I made, and I've already set this to the width of the new hardware holes, and so I will be able to just mark these with the little punch tool, and then I will know where to drill. But before doing so, I just want to double check the distance with my hardware. To get clean drill holes, I am going to start with a small drill bit, move to a medium drill bit, and then finally up to the largest one that will allow the holes be large enough to fit the new hardware. Alright, let's take a look back at where we started with this dusty, outdated dresser, and this is how it turned out. This one was definitely a challenge, but I love how this brass hardware looks on this dark wood. I'm super curious to know what you think. Did you like the original, the tan wash version, or this dark version the best? Let me know in the comments. If you like this type of content, please hit subscribe so you don't miss out on my future projects. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.